Bonjour, bonsoir. Welcome to One Film, One Federation in collaboration with Telescope Films presentation of French Cinémathèque's L'Histoire de Souleymane. My name is Renee Ketchum, and Justine Barda, who is the president and founder of Telescope Films, is at the Cairo Film Festival. But she would be here to say that she hopes that many people will go to telescopefilm.com to see what's popular in streaming, as well as her specific French films that have just been released. AFUSA is the largest Alliance Française network in the world, helping 26,000 learners of French each year learn French, live French, and love French. Please take a look at our video. Our film next month, we are thrilled to announce, will be Nouvelle Vague on December 15th, 2025. And today's discussion is on L'Histoire de Souleymane. Thrilled to present Peter Debruge, who will introduce our film. Peter is the chief film critic at Variety, where he has worked since 2005, including a 2-year stint in Paris, where he focused on covering the international festival circuit. Peter is the recipient of the 2018 Prix Alliance Française de Los Angeles and has been awarded the rank of Chevalier in the Ordre des Arts et des Lettres. He is an honorary member of the Jean-Pierre Melville Foundation. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you, and great to see some familiar faces. It looks like kind of a tight crowd this week, but I think a really special film. Maybe we'll have some late comers, but this movie premiered at the Cannes Film Festival, and Cannes has different sections. This was in the Un certain regard section, which is sort of where maybe films that are kind of not as high profile, directors that are not as well known go, but often where some of the most interesting voices and projects land. There it won the Best Actor prize, which probably will surprise no one. Here's an actor who this is his first performance. He's not a professional, Abu Sangare, and Sangare, was a mechanic who kind of made a similar journey, and that informs the kind of the story of Suleiman's story. My colleague, our former colleague and longtime friend Justin Chang, who's now the critic at the New Yorker, did a really beautiful review of this movie when it came out, and he was kind of unpacking the title, Suleiman's story, which is a direct translation of the French title, and so we know that sometimes movie titles kind of go through a reinvention into another language, but it makes sense to kind of deconstruct it. And there's layers to it, obviously, and I think that's one of the things we'll kind of be looking at here today. But there is the story that he is rehearsing and that he's expected to present in order to be granted asylum, and that's kind of the thing that is driving so much of this very tense and it's almost a nail-biting thriller type presentation over the course of this movie. We're also watching the true story, right? Like of what his life is in Paris. And we don't really see, as Justin kind of had pointed out in his review, this is unusual in that, like, a lot of these movies kind of will give you flashbacks, and in the flashbacks they'll kind of that's where they'll bludgeon you with the way you're supposed to feel about something. And it's interesting, I think, in this film that we don't get that. We never see anything other than the present tense, really. And the uh, and the story that comes at the end, that he tells is something that we've maybe been feeling has informed things, but it's not until that final interview when it kind of comes out. And one thing that I find really interesting is that that story, if I understand the kind of interviews correctly, that the director Boris Loikin and Sangare have kind of given, sounds like it is very true to Sangari's actual experience. So in a way, Suleiman's story, the third one of those, the one that he kind of corrects and gives in that final interview, is in fact Sangare's story, or largely inspired by it. And what I kind of want to hear, because I've really enjoyed in these last sessions that we've done, the way that we've involved a lot of different voices. I'd kind of like to hear how this movie landed with you, each of you. The what I can say to maybe kind of kick us off, and then we'll sort of see where the conversation leads us. But uh, I feel like what we're seeing on the streets of Paris in this movie is something that is happening all over the world, and it's certainly happening in America. It's certainly happening in big cities in America, and and I learned so much about, I think, what just the kind of super heroic day-to-day kind of feats that someone in Suleiman's position goes through. It had never occurred to me, for instance, the thing for like that delivery app drivers, if there might be something built into the apps to sort of prevent undocumented people from using them. And then how within that you have this whole kind of shadow industry that exists, this kind of horrible deal with the Emmanuel character where he's renting out his app and all the kind of extra hurdles he has to go through. And I mean, I think that's just one of many details that clearly comes from the research that Loikin and his team put into making sure that this was an authentic portrayal. But so that's just some thoughts of my own. But let's kind of see the this movie kind of knocked me sideways when I first saw it, and I'm not sure if there's someone else who really feels like they were devastated or really affected by it who might want to speak up about how they took it.
I
Uh,
agree, Peter.
we'll
If I
start with
can
Liz. Go
go,
ahead.
yeah, since I just jumped in. Um, yeah, hi, I'm Liz Myers, and I watched it just last night, and it really, as you said, knocked me for a loop. It was so tragic, and watching his daily existence and the illegal, immoral, um, the consequences of the people that treated him so badly, the Emanuele, who illegally, I guess, rented out his app, and how how difficult life is as we now face this kind of thing happening in the United States, and the actions of ICE, and dealing with all of this in the cities of our major cities and the streets of our major cities with our Hispanic population. You see this, same thing happening here, and just how tragic it was that he how he was able to, or had to, find a place to sleep every night. Um, how, as you said, he lost the money for someone who refused the delivery. How, it was just like this ongoing struggle, this sort of Sisyphus pushing the boulder up the mountain, and then every morning it would roll back down and smash him. And then at the end, I kind of felt like, were we going to see this tied up in a nice little bow, and have him, get his application approved, and enter French society? And we don't know. And I guess that's, the realistic situation that we have here. It wasn't a movie to make you feel better about the way things are.
No, certainly not. All really good points. And I want us to, in the course of this conversation, get to the ending because I love that because we have these conversations after watching the movies, we can really look at endings. It's something as a film critic, it's the thing that I always feel like I have one arm tied behind my back. It's like you can't spoil anything. You can't really talk. But, the endings are often kind of like the make or break moment. And this one, of course, has this almost 20-minute scene that that really means a lot to, I think, the way that we receive the movie. But we'll save that for a little bit later in the discussion. I want to hear a few more reactions. Maggie, you raised your hand, and Jeanne will come to. So we'll come around. We'll make sure everybody gets a chance. I just noticed Maggie next.
I felt very, very emotional and almost wondering, oh my gosh, oh, this is just so terrible. And probably because I worked with the international students at the university, and many of them had visa issues, but nothing like this, because they were illegally here. And my husband is also an immigrant. And again, he didn't have any problems. So watching this and seeing what was going on really touched my heart. I was really just fighting for him the whole time. And also I have so many friends who are really worried. They're legal, but citizens are being shot. So I just every accident that he had a bicycle accident, and then but there were a few touches that I really liked when he went to the old man's house, and you could see his humanity there and his caring for an elderly person, and then the sweet lady that gave him candy. So, it wasn't 100% horrible, but then that made the horrible part even more horrible. That there were positives there that he was able to experience. Made him.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that's it.
No, I'm glad you bring up some of these details in particular. And I always have thought, I don't cry in movies in the sad, tragic stuff. I often like maybe I've seen too many movies or whatever. My skin is too thick. It's like I kind of my guard goes up when that happens. But what does get me is spontaneous acts of human kindness. And that moment that you mentioned, I think they're both examples of that in the film. But the one where the Asian woman at the kind of delivery window or what have you, like just offers him a piece of strawberry candy. And it's just this gesture. It's not that she's giving him candy, it's that she sees him. It's like you realize, I think the premise of this film is that Suleiman times 1,000 or more on the streets of Paris is there all the time. They're they're kind of like this invisible underclass that's bringing your food, or that's kind of narrowly avoiding being hit by your car or your Uber or whatever. And and a lot of us, I think, when put in that position, the position of being in that car or ordering that food, tend not to acknowledge these people. It's almost inconvenient to do so because it's like having to consider their full story. So this movie becomes an exercise in empathy, but one that I commend for not being manipulative. I don't feel. I mean, I think there's stuff here. Everything here feels like it comes from lived experience of the people who are doing this every day and who Boris Loikin kind of studied and talked to. And even when things that are terrible that happen or things that are good that happen, it's not done in such a way that I think it's not accompanied by music that tells us or it's all part of the fabric of this kind of 48 hours or so. And so I like that you point out that these like those moments, I think, with those two in particular, if you could contrast it with just after being hit by the car, he tries to deliver that meal to the woman and the way that she treats him. And we understand why she would feel that way. We are like, that's part of the thing that's really heartbreaking about that scene is like, that we might be able to put ourselves in the position of being that callous ourselves, and we're feeling the repercussions of it. But all right, Jean, I promised I saw you next. Gail, I've seen your hand, and there was someone else. We'll go through.
The first time I'd seen this was last year at the UWM Milwaukee French Film Festival. And I remember it was just so like, whoa, everything you just described, where it just leaves you absolutely like, oh my gosh, what just hit me so strongly and moved me, because it wasn't manipulated. It was so raw. And I thought, I'm a high school French teacher. And I thought, oh my gosh, I've got to get a hold of this film to show it to my students. And then I watched it again last night, and I still was it was almost easier watching it, knowing, okay, I know this is going to happen. I know that. It's because like, we're talking about at the beginning, how it is so stressful. It's almost like an action thriller. That's sort of a horrible scene, these steps this poor man goes through. It's just heart-wrenching. And then interwoven with those couple little specks of kindness, of being seen, as you see. And now I'm just wondering, after I watched it and I think about my students saying, oh my gosh, can I show this to them? Because it is, I'm thinking they're 16, 17, 14, 15 years old. And I know how traumatic it is in a way, you know what I mean? And now wondering, a lot of them living this. I mean, I had a student last year from Mexico who had to go back because of the whole ICE business. And I'm just like, can I bring it to them? I mean, I think it's so powerful and so important to, but then at the same time, is it going to hit too close to home? I mean, you know what I mean? It's just really, it's so, so good. It's so powerful. It's so tragic. And the other thing, I had a real quick question. I don't know if you said this at the very beginning because I couldn't hear. But I remember at the International Film Festival, the French Film Festival, they're talking about how the actor himself was in the same situation. And at the time, they didn't know if he had been approved for his asylum. Do you know what his status is, the actor, if he in fact has been granted asylum in France?
So I'm not entirely up to speed on that. I do remember like there are ways in which the story kind of parallels, including like we were saying, his own kind of journey is the flashback we kind of hear, with he describes the way his mother was viewed as a witch and how that kind of impacted the way he was seen, and kind of the tough stops along the way. I think to Algeria first, but my understanding is that by virtue of this film, that in some ways he's kind of like probably too much in the public eye for it to go any way other than in his favor. One thing that I do know is that like a lot of people have seen this film and think like, what an incredible performer he is, what a career he will have, and that doesn't seem to be interesting to him at all. He's studied to be a mechanic. That's what he was doing when they cast him in this. And I believe that he's gone back to that. That's, what he's interested in. So my understanding is that he's continuing to work as a mechanic in France. But I mean, his asylum situation and the one that this kind of Ghanaian refugee type are not exactly parallel, but it's interesting. Let's hear a few more opinions. I tend to sort of get a little long-winded in responding to people, and I want to make sure we hear from more people first. So, but we can come back to some of the points you mentioned. I see the two hands that are kind of up in the corner, but I want to hear from Gail, who was kind of physically raising her hand first.
Okay. Oh, I see the signal for hand raising. Sorry, I didn't.
No, it's okay. I almost never know where to find that myself. So
I just see it
those
now.
who do, but
I don't see it as a tragedy from his point of view. From our perspective, perhaps, but I think his goal was definitely different than what we saw. We saw it as his history, but in fact, his motivation was his mother, and being able to prove to her and send back to her some money and take care of her. That was what he really felt he needed to do. So his tenacity was simply part of that motivation to prove himself capable of doing that. I don't see a tragic character here. I see one, a man who goes through the daily lifestyle of someone of his import. And albeit it's sad, but that's in fact what it is for, as you say, many thousands of refugees. In the end, he couldn't depart from anything but his authentic self, because he couldn't lie, as he was told by the man who tried to train him for the interview. He could not remember the exact details, although he seemed to have managed to fit them in somehow. The interviewer knew exactly what he was doing, but then he finally fessed up. He had to tell the truth because, as mother told him, you can't lie. And his mother was his main motivation. So I thought it was kind of an epic hero as opposed to a tragedy of sorts.
Yeah, well, I think that's fair. I mean, like maybe it's confounding the word tragic with sad, because it is, you know, quite depressing to see kind of what he goes through
from
and
our point of view, but I don't think he had time to say, "Oh, woe is me."
well, I do think probably one of the things that makes it sad from our point of view is what a lot of immigrants have to put up with and seem willing to accept as their kind of normal, their everyday thing. A good example, I think, is, and a good example of the way that I think things are presented in an intelligent way that is impactful without being overly manipulative, is it's fairly late in the movie, or, you know, a third or a half of the way through, when we go for the first time to you know, one of the shelters, and we see just kind of like what that, like, after everything he's kind of gone through, the hustle during the day, the hustle takes him all the way to missing catching the bus. We see what happens when he misses it. But to me, that moment when the phones all start to go off and you realize, like, oh, these poor souls can't even have a full night's rest. They all have to wake up early in the morning to reserve a spot for that night. I mean, it's just and it makes you realize, you know, I think of like how many people in this country, whether native born or immigrants or whatever, are living paycheck to paycheck. This guy's living day to day, you know, and
Right.
his paycheck to paycheck situation is this every Tuesday, and he's having it kind of skimmed off. It's like it kind of compresses, you know, that thing that is for so many Americans and so many people around the world, like just a struggle. You know, it really kind of whether it compresses or accelerates, or, you know, it's just kind of like on the cycle of tension is, you know, so short here. Nancy, would love to hear from you. Be sure to unmute. Go ahead.
Hi.
There you are.
Sorry. Actually, you made the perfect segue in talking about that, because one thing that I really noticed was the how the immigrants themselves would take advantage of other immigrants. And I'm very close to a woman who came here to the US as a refugee, and she's become an American citizen. And she's experienced this as well. And we even see that Souleymane, even though you see his kindness in certain instances, he also at one point is approached by some other men who are like, can you help me get this gig as a delivery driver? And he completely brushes them off because, you know, he's very focused on his own life and his own hurdles. And I think that's completely understandable. I've certainly seen very similar parallels in my friend's life to what happened with Souleymane. In fact, her brother is in Paris as an illegal and, you know, probably going through very similar things. She was able to come here through the, you know, official refugee channels, but her husband actually was denied refugee status, and he is here in the asylum system and is currently with this administration in danger of, being kicked out at any time. So it's a very precarious lifestyle. You cannot plan for the future. And I don't know, I just thought it was a very touching story and something that really people need to see and to understand to really, I guess, have a feeling of what other people go through and what their lives are. And I thought it was very interesting at the end as far as the story that he had memorized, because, at least in the United States, and it looked the same in France, that, you will not be granted asylum unless your life is in danger. And we view poverty as not a good enough reason to be given asylum. But his story really was one of poverty and a certain type of persecution, but not one that is generally granted asylum status. So although he was very honest when he walked away, the ending definitely was ambiguous, and it was not at all clear that he would receive that. So I just thought it was a very important film, and one I wish that many more people would see.
Yeah, I think you bring up a lot of great points. Before responding to them, Jeanette, you had your hand up. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, I just had a couple of quick comments. For some reason, my Zoom app keeps cutting in and out. But the vision that we have of Paris in the film reminded me of a film that we saw, but we discussed, Peter, one time when you weren't here, someone else led the discussion, the vision of Paris in Full Time. I don't know if anyone else was there for that discussion or saw the film, but it's about a single mother.
Oh, the movie Full Time. That's what.
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, I know this movie well, and that's a good comparison. Go ahead, sure.
Yeah, just the alienating vision of what it is like to have to take the public transportation to try and get places, and the way that people are brusque and simply usually don't have time to respond to your questions or what you might need from them. That is more typical of a bigger city. But yeah, so I thought that was kind of an interesting parallel. And then Peter, at the beginning, you mentioned these kind of moments of humanity that you find in the film, or at least humanity being showed to Souleymane. And I found myself looking just to see what it was that gave him the strength to go on, because at a certain moment you kind of go, oh my gosh, he's trying everything that he can try, and
Oh, it might be you warned us that you were cutting out. I don't know. I've lost your audio there, but
it's
oh, go ahead. Just track back a second or two. Uh-oh. The point that you were making, you want to try again, Jeanette? You're muted right now.
There we go. Okay, before my app goes off again, I just was going to mention that I was kind of looking to see if I could figure out where he found his strength in the film. And we learn, of course, at the end that part of it is his motivation to take care of his mother. But the couple of incidents that you mentioned, the woman who gave him the strawberry dessert, and I mean, when you're going through a rough time, sometimes it's just those little moments where someone shows you a kindness or humanity, or you can laugh for just a minute or two, that keep you going in a way that nourish your soul a little bit, so that you can just keep on going a little bit further. And I was thinking, are any of these people actually his friends? Does he have friends at all? because he doesn't have much of.
Yeah, I think it's cutting out again, but like to pick up on what you're saying, I mean I think the and even to go back maybe to what was it, Emily, who just spoke beforehand, like you know, there's something really interesting about the way that there's a community of kind of immigrants that are here. I think I was misspeaking the country too. They're from Guinea or Guinea or not Ghana. I should have not confounded those two, but the Guinean kind of community in Paris is kind of what we're seeing portrayed here, and there will of course be different diasporic groups in Paris that kind of like into which people, because of their native language, because of their native culture, you know, will fall. And it's not necessarily that they're friendly; it's just that it's sort of like, I mean, it's not that they're that they can't be, but rather, you know, it's like you're being thrust into a city that's overwhelming, unfamiliar, you know, modern in ways that may or may not be true of your experience beforehand, and so you kind of turn to these other people with a kind of trust or a kind of camaraderie. As any of us may have felt when I went to Paris myself, I kind of gravitated early on to kind of the American expats who were there. And then over time, I didn't need that anymore. I almost resented it. I wanted to learn or improve my French. And so I didn't want to hang around all the English speakers anymore. But early on, it's just kind of like, you know, to figure out things like taxes or how to open a bank or whatever it is, you know, you look to those familiar faces. And I can sort of see depicted in the movie or hinted, even though it's not explicit, this kind of cycle that is happening. And I think Emily was mentioning this, that like people are already approaching him about how do I get the hookup with an app or whatever. And it's even though I think we come to see Souleymane as a very sympathetic and humane character, if he gets his paperwork and whatever, I don't think it's you know, unreasonable to imagine that he will potentially exploit someone else in the same way that he was, you know, like that he might open an account now that he's legal and able to, assuming that that goes. I think the movie is very ambiguous about how his interview will be adjudicated, but like the it, you know, there is this kind of like acceptance of a lot of these things. And maybe that goes back to, you know, the question we were having of, is it truly a tragedy or is this just kind of the reality that we're seeing, you know, and a very, you know, a very unhappy or compromised reality. But so to Jeanette's point, I mean, it's like, I think, you know, in France, you have better distinctions with the word ami versus connaissance, or like, you know, it's always interesting to French people when they come to America, they meet someone at a party and that evening on Facebook, someone's asked to friend them. And that's not how friendships work in Paris, you know, or in France. You know, friendships are the people you've grown up with and who you take a bullet for almost, I sometimes think, you know, and there's no one in this circle that Sangare knew before he not Sangare, but rather Souleymane, not to confound the actor from the character, that Souleymane kind of knew before he landed there. And so you know, you kind of make do with these relationships. And I think it's demonstrated that a lot of those relationships are unhealthy or predatory, you know, and it's like that scene where he really kind of confronts Emmanuel in the hallway in front of his wife, and you know, the tension of that is, I think, illustrative of you know, kind of one of these things playing out where someone who's been exploited has kind of had enough and can't take it anymore. Maria, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just now a different subject, but I thought the beginning of the film was great. Because I have just been in Paris recently, and the noises of the trains and the cars, and him on his bike riding through the streets of Paris is precarious at best. Like his whole life was precarious, but I thought the camera viewpoint of him on his bike was so well done as he wheels his way through those bike lanes and he's going past all the buses and the other cars, and it's dangerous just for him going from A to B, let alone everything else that he has to deal with, and this dependence that they have on their phones. I thought that was really brought out in this film. That he has that phone that's right there, and I kept thinking, oh, if you lose that phone, if you lose your bike, what will happen? What will you do next? It's just, he was so reliant on everything. And it turns out all of the immigrants have their phones, but they need them just to reserve a night, a room, somewhere to sleep. And that was his way. He couldn't have worked as a courier, as a delivery person without having the app on his phone. And all of that is just so many. I just was on the edge of my seat worrying about him the whole, well, really the whole film, but particularly in the beginning when there's so many dangers out on the roads of Paris. So
Yeah,
I thought the film, the way that they filmed it was very well done.
and the movie takes a certain kind of or requires a certain kind of new style in order to film it. I think the director has sort of pointed to a few inspirations or examples. The Dardenne brothers films. I don't know if those of you participating in the conversation today kind of are familiar with, but there are these two brothers from Belgium, Jean-Luc or Jean-Pierre and Luc Dardenne, who have won the Camera d'Or twice. Sorry, the Palme d'Or twice. The top prize at Cannes, and their style, which kind of comes out of a documentary background, has been to kind of have a handheld kind of observational camera that follows, that tracks the characters in an almost real time or very naturalistic way. It seems to be kind of the 60 years later follow-up to what the Italian neorealists were doing, by kind of taking newsreel cameras and filming in black and white on the streets of Rome, kind of after the war. The Dardenne brothers kind of innovated this style that has impacted a lot of international filmmaking. I'm being a bit of a film teacher here, but bear with me as we go through this. It's like you look at a movie like The Wrestler, the Darren Aronofsky movie with Mickey Rourke. It's basically, the style is that of a Dardenne brothers movie. It's also there in the same director's Black Swan, where the camera is kind of like almost following in the back of the head of the character. And this feels like it kind of is an extension of that, but we're not probably thinking about how they shot this. But when you've got a bicycle, delivery guy kind of zooming around the streets of Paris, and you are also kind of on the move with him, it requires a whole, rig or setup where you can have cameras and sound and all of that kind of being captured in the moment. And this really is the sound of Paris. So just the technical logistics of pulling this off, as I understand it, all of the footage that we see is kind of like done without permits in as realistic an environment as possible. I think the one exception is the car accident, which had to have been, kind of staged. So they blocked the streets and kind of orchestrated that to have it exactly and to have it be safe. But most of the rest of it is kind of, small cameras, kind of capturing things kinetically as they're following on bikes and such. And that I think gives everything an immediacy, but it also gives things a verisimilitude. It feels like documentaries. It feels like reality TV. The other kind of reference point that Loikin is pointed to is the Romanian New Wave, where you have movies like 4 Months, 3 Weeks, 2 Days, or The Death of Mr. Lazarescu, both of which are kind of similarly done in an almost real-time, very gritty, might be a good word for it, way, where you don't have crane shots and you don't have dolly tracks, and but you really are kind of immersed and kind of present with the characters, often in close-up or really intimate situations, and and I think all of that contributes to the language of it. Looking back at kind of the comparison to neorealism, this movie feels like a kind of grandchild maybe of something like The Bicycle Thieves, the Vittorio De Sica movie. And he has said in interviews, that is the director, Boris Loikin, that this is a different kind of dynamic. The worst thing that can happen to these characters is not having their bicycle stolen, the way that that's a devastating loss in the kind of Italian neorealist film. Here, instead, the most devastating thing that can happen is flunking this interview, because that's the make or break thing about their legal status, about their prospects. And we see, I think, that something as simple as lodging. It's like you can't get lodging if you don't have status. And so one of the reasons they're stuck in this Sisyphean cycle of every morning waking up and, reserving a bed is because they can't sign a loyer. They can't have an apartment of their own. And, or if they are, it's a whole other story of exploitation and kind of off the booksness. And, we hear a lot about those stories here. A couple of comments that came up in the sidebar here that are worth pointing out. Someone was comparing to Nouvelle Vague, which will also be kind of fun. That's the movie we're watching next month. And, that looks at the kind of turning point, the making of the movie Breathless, as kind of reconstructed by Richard Linklater. But that is also a moment where you have a revolution in how films are made, and that kind of mantra that went with the Nouvelle Vague, with the French New Wave of grab a camera and take to the streets, to sort of make your movies. That's following, I think, what was going on in Italy at the time. And that's, of course, this movie is also a descendant of a lot of that kind of revolution. There was another comment. Someone else said, thank you, Deidre, for correcting me on the country. I'm so sorry for flubbing that earlier. You also pointed out another great comparison to the movie Dirty Pretty Things, which is an English language movie that kind of launched the career of Chiwetel Ejiofor. But he is kind of playing. It's been a while since I've seen it. There's a heart transplant subplot. It's a Stephen Frears movie, I think, right? It's really a great film.
Actually, what they're doing is they're harvesting kidneys, and it's
that's
another
it.
form of exploitation for immigrants. And there's so many similarities. There's that constant grind of having to, because one thing we talked about is the thing with his bike. I agree with you. Losing his bike would be a tragedy, but not getting the asylum. Someone mentioned earlier that we as a country don't necessarily allow economic asylum, and that's what he was in essence seeking. I mean, not that he didn't have a hardship, but at the end of the day, he really was there for financial reasons. But the reason why I found Dirty Pretty Things as a close analogy is they can't actually work unless they get asylum. So that's what's stressing him so much, is he's here because he needs to take care of his mother. And as long as he doesn't have the asylum, that's why he can't. That's because that scene where the cops stop him, well, actually, he's actually delivering to these
He
cops.
delivers to the cops. Yeah,
He
yeah.
delivers to the cops, and they're like, what you're doing is illegal. And that scene was the most tense for me, because that could have been a make or break moment for any asylum seeker, any immigrant that's in a country illegally, regardless of the country. But in that particular situation, I found it fascinating the way that the director portrayed it, because ordinarily they probably would have taken him in, because it would have been justification to arrest him and deport him immediately. They knew that he was there illegally, but they came away from it saying, we just really want to eat. This is nuance is what they were saying. But the Dirty Pretty Things is even more horrific than this film, in my opinion, because what they're doing for those asylum seekers, for those people who haven't seen the film, is in exchange for their organs, they're getting them the papers that Souleymane was trying to attain as well. So that's a disturbing film that I think is an interesting analogy.
Thank you for bringing that one up. I really love that movie, and yet I think in comparison to this one, it's very different in that like I think I'm remembering it correctly. I think it's Stephen Frears who made it, who is a great filmmaker, but it's much more of a constructed kind of that's right drama,
agree.
and so like there is a kind of uh, part of what is effective about it is the way that it's kind of like, things are engineered to kind of make us feel different ways. In some ways, it may be more satisfying for that reason. In other ways, it may feel less authentic, or more didactic or trying to make a certain point. Like, but I would encourage everyone to take a look at that movie. I mean, it's just it's now probably almost 25 years old. Um, uh, it was made in
Exactly.
2002, and yet these sort of stories kind of perpetuate, and it's like and I think we're going to see more of them rather than fewer, no matter how much enforcement of this kind of stuff goes on. If anything, the enforcement kind of makes it trickier. The Dardenne brothers film before last, Tori and Lokita, is also very similar. That movie is they're Belgian, but it's a French language movie. There you have two um, refugees seeking papers, and they've kind of manufactured a story that they are brother and sister when that is not in fact the case, and they're trying to kind of present themselves as that to the authorities. So meanwhile, the older sister's working in a restaurant where she's being sexually exploited by the guy who owns it, and I think it's really helpful to see these movies that are kind of grounded in research. We may watch them with a certain skepticism, wondering if there's agendas or not. But I think in the case of this movie and in the case of Tori and Lokita, there's a kind of matter-of-fact presentation where the filmmakers do not pretend to have the solution. It's a much too complicated problem for that, and they are coming from a humane or humanist place when depicting these stories. But I think they're also aware that like you can't necessarily just welcome everybody who has a kind of a disadvantaged life from any corner of the world. So you have to kind of deal with the reality that's there. But I think, and I think maybe this is a good moment to sort of focus on the ending, because I think the ending really is the way that the movie wants us to kind of process this. It makes us aware that there are rules and there are kind of certain expectations for asylum or status or a visa, but it also, by this point, we kind of understand the stakes. We see kind of how invested, maybe that's not the right word, but we understand how much this matters to Suleiman. One thing before maybe getting into this last scene, but I also want us to think about. It was kind of mentioned in one or two of the earlier comments, the Paris that this movie shows, because I think there's something so romantic about Paris, and so many movies have given us this kind of storybook vision. That's the premise of so much. Like, one of the things France exports is a kind of romantic sense of itself on screen. This is such a different view of Paris, to the point that we're not seeing kind of famous landmarks. There's no kind of Eiffel Tower in the back or something. It's like this is a street level kind of outsider's view, I think, of Paris, and one that doesn't spend any time like looking up at the beautiful architecture or marveling at what is charming, but really kind of sees a version of the city that no one's going to use this as a tourism brochure to attract people to
It's
the.
like La Haine, Le Banlieue.
Yeah, right. There are certainly other films like that give kind of, and La Haine is a good example, and like a much more urban or a much grittier, kind of side of things. But I appreciate that, like, you can kind of take this movie and you can take a Nouvelle Vague and you can take an Emily in Paris and sort of like triangulate what the real deal is. But okay, so let's talk a little bit about the ending, because I think, there's a lot going on there. There's a moral dimension, but I think maybe I just kind of want to hear people's interpretation of what you think happens, because given that he has this turn where he's kind of caught in the lie and he chooses to be truthful, is it an ending that gives us a sense that things may work out for him, or how do you read it? Joan, go ahead.
Well, when I was watching this film, I thought this cannot end well. I just was watching it with a sense of dread. And, I thought he was going to lose his phone. I thought he was going to get his bike stolen. I mean, it's so intense. And then at the end, I thought, well, it's not as, at least it ends with a possibility of something good happening. But I just have to say, I had to compare it, because today I clicked on something from the New York Times, the way 3 people here were treated, and they actually were legal. They had papers, and they were still picked up by ICE. I had a green card. I am a naturalized citizen. I'm from Canada. I was part of the foreign students. So one of these was a journalist, I think, from Canada. And so I so identified, and they were treated so badly. I just had to make the comparison. That's why I think this movie especially hit hard for me.
I mean, it's really kind of heartbreaking that this movie really feels like it's, kind of ripped from today's news, and it's, depending on the day of the week you watch it, and it'll remind you of another upsetting thing. The one thing I was reminded of is there was a film, I think it was this past year, it might have been 2 years ago, but in the Oscar short film category, there was a movie that was clearly made with kind of a political point, but it was about the kind of interview that an undocumented father with I think, American wife and a child that was born in the US, goes to give his interview, and basically the equivalent of an ICE raid happens and we've been hearing versions of that story, right? Like people who were trying to do the right thing, like, like maybe they got here in a way that breaks the law, but like once here, they're trying to make their status legitimate, but it takes interviews, it takes tens of thousands of dollars and lawyers sometimes to achieve that, and it's and it seems like the equivalent of shooting fish in a barrel for someone like ICE that just need statistics or numbers that of people, but like, why target the individuals who are trying to kind of go through that pathway? And but that short film, I'll try and look up when someone's talking, I'll multitask and try and find the title just so it's not dangling out there. But is kind of like the American equivalent of some of the same stress here. I think what we see in that scene with I think they're called protection agents, like for those seeking kind of asylum. But I think what we see is both skepticism, it's part of her job, but we also see, I think, a genuine empathy that's being performed in her response. But there seems to be a larger bureaucracy at play. And so she can do what she's doing, which is trying to get to the truth, but then it's very ambiguous whether the truth will do any good. Maria, I saw you unmuted. Did you want to say something?
Yes, I I thought that I had a little bit of hope from the interviewer, because she could have just ended it and not given away anything and not let him carry on speaking. She could have just said, well, thank you, we'll be in touch. But she didn't. She gave him a chance to take back everything that he just said, or just carry on and say the truth. And I felt hopeful from that part of it, that she was going to. I know that somebody said her hands are tied and all the rest of it, but she could have just ended the interview, and she didn't. She gave him another chance. So I was hoping.
Yeah, she seemed to be, Sonia, I see you raising your hand, so you'll be next. She seems to be trying to give him whatever advantage she can. Like, she's in a weird position too. It's not appropriate for her to be serving as his lawyer or as his whatever, but at the same time, I mean, if you've ever done versions of those interviews, and when I lived in Paris, just going in for your visa, which is something that should be quite straightforward, you're aware that, like, you put together this enormous dossier, and if you're missing a page, they can send you back, and it can be weeks, and your whole status is, and you feel this kind of thing of like, what is the mood of the person going to be when I see them? And could that make or break it? Bureaucracy works so much more differently in Paris from in the US. I think in the US, people like to point to rules and say, well, the rule says, this, therefore, we have to deny your thing. And in Paris, it all seems kind of negotiable, and so knowing that there's this, kind of like, what can I do to sort of like have a good outcome? Or will I be the victim of, someone's capriciousness? Sonia, go ahead. Unmute though, please.
Can I unmute? Okay, sorry. I guess for me, the question is not so much whether there's a positive or negative outcome, but the fact that it opens up a space for him to be for the first time and to speak truth to power. And whether it's forced, he's forced because he's being caught in a lie. But there's something hopeful for him. At least it's a victory, because we follow him, and it's an immersive technique that reminds me of Sean Baker, actually, in Tangerine. It's the hustle on the streets. So you follow him, and this immersive technique is really, it's incredible, because we feel with him and never above him. But so he doesn't have time to be still. Like, he can't. He has to perform all the time. It's about performances, and he, in fact, like, the film is constructed in such a way that at the end, at last, even if it's to doom him, at last, he can speak the truth about himself. There's something about existing as an individual, even if he's going maybe to run the risk of being exiled. And that moment for me is a hopeful moment, that you can speak the truth about yourself to someone else. And whether he's going to be, sent back to his country or not, I don't know. But I'm still hopeful for that kind of space that opens up for him to just be.
Yeah, I love your reading on it. And I think you're right. I think that there's a redemptive aspect to it. That thing that we're saying about being seen. Part of the point of that scene is not whether or not he stays. It's that we, the audience, get to hear this one story that seems to be that actor's story, but also like an actual, and all of this is part of it, but I think contained in the scene are clues that, like, just his honesty is kind of like the thing that is a defining aspect. Deidre, I think you raised your hand again. If so, please, versus maybe having left it up. If you have another point, I'd love to hear it.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you. I actually put another one in the chat. It's not as film avant-garde as this one, but well, I don't know if this one was that, but it's called Kitchen Brigade, and it's more of a comedy. But it's about individuals who are about to age out of the asylum system, and they're going through a very similar process. So I think it's very well done. But what I was going to add about the thoughts around the interviewer in his interview, I have a different perspective on how she viewed his story. In those situations, many of us have traveled abroad. they're actually trying to get the truth out of you because she needs to probably build a case to justify all those other stories. And what I mean by that is she realizes that his story is false because she's heard the same stories previously. So by getting him to tell the accuracy of his story, she can build a case to say, I have all these other asylum seekers who are telling the same story. Here's a story that is actually true. And I don't necessarily know that she was empathizing with them. She's probably heard the same story over and over again, but that was my perspective. Thank you.
Right. The Shirley shared a story in the chat. Maybe take a look at that before we wrap up, because it's kind of a moving one. Jeanette, do you want to give us a kind of closing thought here?
Sure. I appreciated what Sonia was saying, and please excuse me if I repeat anything other people have said, because I think I've missed about half of the discussion due to my internet issues.
You've been battling it today, but we appreciate your sticking in there.
Well, it's been somewhat frustrating.
These sessions are recorded, and I think if you want to catch what you missed, or if you miss one of these ever, you can find them on YouTube. It's worth saying that. But go ahead, Jeanette. Tell us your thought.
Yeah, I was just thinking what it reminded me of the interview between Souleymane and this administrator. It was more as if she was almost being, I felt that she was favorably impressed by him, or at least she had some compassion for him and his situation. And I thought that it came through in the way that she didn't cut him off at the end and that she let him continue to talk. It was almost as if she recognized, and I'm sure this probably happened a lot in those interviews, that this was very traumatic for him, that what he was trying to say to her was so hard for him to say. He couldn't do it. He couldn't get the words out, and not because he was so worried about being granted asylum, but because it was so painful. It echoed for me the woman who had to talk about the forced marriage that we saw with Barry, or whatever his name was. It was just so painful. He could barely explain it. And so I think that there was kind of this feeling of, I don't know that it was necessarily healing, but at least that did allow him that possibility of telling his own story, and for whatever, like I said, healing or help it could be to him.
I'm realizing I put the name of the short film, Aline, which is kind of alien broken up, but also kind of like maybe like you're renting time or something like that. And the other, just so you guys can see, is Tori and Lokita. This was in competition at Cannes and was the film by the Dardenne brothers. I love those filmmakers, and this is one of their tougher films to kind of, I mean, it's a pretty brutal depiction of things. But basing on something you're saying, Jeanette, I'm reminded, like, you know, one thing I was kind of thinking about that whole scene is it's not the purpose of them having these kind of interviews, but it serves this role that is somewhat like therapy, somewhat like confession. You know, it kind of makes me think of how in a time before psychotherapy, confession in the Catholic Church probably served a therapeutic, you know, role. And I think, you know, one of the things we're seeing is a kind of conscience cleansing, or a kind of coming clean, or a kind of honesty, all of those things that seem to, whatever the outcome will be, it's going to be this process that she lets him have, and that we hear seems to be kind of therapeutic for him. All right, we are a little bit over time, so I'm going to wrap this up here. But I really appreciate kind of how thoughtful these conversations have been over the past months. Next month's movie is a fun one. I think we'll have it won't be you know, the topics that we'll look at are going to be more about kind of the just what we love about French cinema in this moment that was really alive. The film is Nouvelle Vague, and we will be having that discussion like this one a week earlier than typical because of the holiday. So join us kind of like, I think on the third Monday of November for Nouvelle Vague. I know you'll enjoy that film. The link is in the to that conversation is in the chat. We'll see you next month, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter.